Well, thank you very much, and what a great venue. Wow, I'm one of the people that are local to Miami here that got to drive here and find parking about a mile and a half from the location, so that's good. So I'm actually a Canadian. You'll hear that in my speech at some point, but as all Canadians, we end up in Florida at some point. And if it's going to be remote work, and if we're going to work from anywhere, you might as well work under a palm tree, was my figuring. But what my job is, and many of the numbers that Andrew shared, is what I do every day. I look at the world economy, the world GDP, by country, by industry, by buyer type, by segment of the market, every which way possible, and watch this number every day. 75% of world trade, according to the WTO, goes indirectly. And when I'm in front of audiences, I'll mention to them that you bought your last car from a dealer, an independently owned dealer. You bought your last TV from a retailer. You bought your last jar of peanut butter from a grocer. Then you sit back and, what is the last thing I bought direct as a consumer or as a business? And you think back, okay, in the 1990s, I bought a Dell computer direct. Perfect. Well, Dell Technologies today, a $100 billion company, is now 58% indirect. 15 years ago, almost to the day, Michael Dell wrote a famous memo internally entitled, "Direct was a revolution, not a religion." And from that day, over 15 years, they moved 58%, $58 billion to partners. And that number is growing faster than their direct business every year. A couple of years ago, when I reminded him about the memo, he got mad at me, but they were at about 50 or 51%. So that's how quickly it's growing. So last year, I caused a little bit of controversy when I wrote a memo. It was a research paper with a blog in front of it, asking a pretty simple question. Given what I had, which was the David Letterman top 10 list of future trends, which we're going to share today, where do distributors play in this role? Where do resellers and retailers and agents and others, brokers, all play by industry? Kind of with some of these future trends that we're watching. So the conclusion of all of it was that in an ecosystem, things are getting much less linear in terms of supply chain, into ERP, out through some levels of distribution. Things are getting more celestial. You're seeing big ecosystems. It looks like space, star systems, with big suns and gravitational pulls and a lot of chaos theory. So in an ecosystem, nobody hides. There's no distribution element that hides behind a partner of some type who then serves a customer. The customer, through their journey, is looking at all the value points and wants to be visible for everything that's going on, and that's a big change for distribution. And the second part of it's a technology conversation. It's a platform for distribution. The Fortune 500 was published last week, and you'll notice if you go down the highest valued companies in the world, they're all platforms. They're all technology platforms. Even non-technology companies are becoming technologies and becoming platforms for their industry. And the orchestration behind that, this platform, is where distributors are investing billions of dollars today to reach. So right when I wrote this research paper, it was 2 weeks before one of the biggest distribution mergers in history, a $60 billion deal between Tech Data and Synnex. They actually delayed the deal by 2 weeks based on these David Letterman top 10 list and doing more due diligence on each of these future trends. The deal ended up going through, but this was kind of like the Elon Musk moment, putting everything on hold for a minute to double check some numbers. Last week in Miami, just down the road, Ingram placing huge bets on Cloud Blue, building out a platform of distribution that they announced that's coming out this summer. Again, a $50 billion distributor rethinking how they go to market. Why the changes is there are new kinds of distribution that are starting to nip in their industry at their heels. So a company like Pax8 just raised $185 million a couple of weeks ago. They don't own a distribution center. They have no expertise in logistics or supply chain. They have no capital or credit facilities. They have nothing what a traditional distribution would have. They distribute bits. They don't distribute atoms. So it's a different level of distribution that's getting all kind of Wall Street attention, and it's focusing on this platform of the future. Even other industries, the telco industry, which for 40 years have had sub-agents and agents up through master agents, which are now called tech solution brokers for diversity reasons, they are flooding into this space, building out these platforms of distribution. There's 25 of these tech solution brokers that are moving around the world and expanding, trying to take on this orchestration role. So a lot of changes. So if I flip industries and look at Ford, and I use Ford, I could use any of the 62 car companies around the world that have all gone all in electric, but Ford started rolling out the F-150 a couple of weeks ago, electric, the Lightning version of it. This is the best-selling car in North America, and it has been for decades. So it's a big, big bet. So the CEO got a little overzealous, and every media outlet wants to interview the CEO of Ford. So they're talking about their go-to-market, their routes to market, how exciting these changes are, online sales, no inventory. They've got 200,000 orders for this truck. That's a 3-year backlog. They had to shut down the backlog. So they stopped taking orders. Continues to get overzealous and says, the North Star in our industry is Tesla. That direct model is so profitable and so clean, and Tesla is this platform for transportation as a service. Because guess what? First the car goes electric, then 5 or 10 years later the car goes self-driving, and then right on the heels of that is transportation as a service. Our kids or our grandkids never own a vehicle. But 5 minutes before they go somewhere, the right kind of vehicle shows up and automatically takes care. So again, getting a little bit out ahead of the tackling here, guess what happens? The dealers kind of watch this media show that the CEO's on and pump the brakes a little bit. You'll recognize that the dealers in the auto industry are pretty powerful people. Over the last 100 years, they get senators elected, they get governors elected, they run the chambers of commerce. These are not people that sit as wallflowers. You see the quote at the bottom, I was freaking out before I even shaven that day. All this talk about direct, all this talk about this new model probably is a little bit too fast, and obviously they had to spend the last few weeks calming everybody down. But I did this on purpose because there's a number of big changes, sea changes happening cross-industry, just at a business level, that have a direct impact on everything we do for a living. When we look at partnerships, and this is something I study every day, I get to wake up and this is my day job, I look at the industry, you look at the go-to-market and the route-to-market strategies, which is fun, you look at the ideal kinds of partners, you architect and design the programs, you look at where to recruit these partners. Once you recruited them, you onboard, educate, train, certify, build competencies, you incent them, you motivate them, you drive loyalty, you co-sell, you co-market, you enable, you engage. There's 100 things that need to be done with any kind of third-party relationship. So in that, we've got a lot of changing trends. One is the buyer itself. And I call it the B2B buyer here. And over the last couple of years, we've done thousands of pages of reports on this, but we know that there's a number of changes going on in consumer, in B2B2C and B2B, where these buyers are obviously more empowered than ever any time else in history. There's a different psychology, there's a different behavior, there's an absolute different journey that they're on. And we know at a high level that the future business buyer is going to look a lot like a consumer. Those worlds are merging, and all the behaviors and things are merging as well. A lot of the expectations, and then the demographics itself. We're within 4 years now of the majority of buyers in the world being millennial. So all kinds of things happening at once, but the research has come back to a single number. From the point you have a problem, your car breaks down, or you need a piece of business software, to the point you make vendor selection. So in any highly considered purchase, there's 28 moments on average. And I'll just go back to cars, because most of us have bought a car recently. You go through these moments. There's 62 manufacturers of cars, And you have a choice of 365 brands, one for every day of the year. It's a real number. So how do you start getting, you're not going to visit 62 dealerships. So how do you start to narrow things down? You talk to your friends, your neighbors, you might go on social media, you start watching some YouTube videos, you go and start to get smarter as a customer. And as you roll down, these 28 moments that happen. Right now, in these 28 moments, the companies that are succeeding in monetizing these moments is basically down to Google and Facebook. They have collected so much personal data, and they can sell that to BMW and Ford and Mercedes and everyone else and show you walking across the internet to that point of vendor selection. Well, both of those companies, Apple and Google, for example, have announced the end of the cookie, the end of this personal tracking on the internet. By the way, Apple and Google share 99% mobile share and 86% desktop browsing share. When they announce the end of the cookie, it is the end of the cookie. So you as a consumer or a business buyer are going to walk through these 28 moments without somebody watching you as you walk through them. So the ownership of these moments, the person that created that YouTube video, the publisher of the magazine, the event, the association, all the things that you're going to walk through to get that car are all potential partners in themselves. And a huge rebate opportunity. Starting to move money from the point of sale to those moments. The next thing is, and we're going to talk about this trend, but in subscription and consumption businesses, in many cases, in many industries now, that point of sale is becoming the first 30 days with the customer. And that's a big change in terms of how you view rebates and how you view the whole economics of distribution. We're going to get into that. But after the point of sale, after that first 30 days, partners are now on board, that 90% partner assist that we talked about. They're on board trying to drive adoption. Whether it's a consumer product like Netflix, you pay your $15, you go a couple months without watching Netflix, you're going to kind of be looking at your credit card going, do I need to renew this? Adoption is key, habit forming. You get into business products, it's the integration of the product, making it very, very sticky. I call it the SAP strategy. You don't meet a lot of people that love SAP historically, but it's impossible to remove because it's just so embedded and integrated into every movement of a company that it's there and it's sticky. And then obviously in a 30-day window, all of the companies now on Wall Street are being pushed towards 108% retention. So for every customer you lose, you have to take a current customer and double them up, upsell them, cross-sell them, enrich the contract somehow. So this post-transaction partnership ability and pushing rebates beyond the point of sale and having them potentially pay out every 30 days forever in a customer journey that never ends. So this is a new way of looking at the customer journey that's elongated and built on top of moments. And all of these moments have technology companies that are building to recognize these moments, to monitor, to measure them, to manage them. And once we get to the point of science, you can now start paying for moments instead of paying at the point of sale. Probably one of the biggest changes we're going through. So this will be the only complicated view I give you as an analyst. But that customer journey across the top, the land and expand that you hear a lot about SaaS companies, they're all in this, let's start the pilot and from there we'll expand it to something big. 30,000 to 300,000 to $3 million. That's how all the companies started. Salesforce and HubSpot, all these big valued companies today are focused so much on that initial low cost purchase to get the balls rolling. And the partners, the 90% partners that wrap around that, or the Microsoft 96%, many of them are listed here. The rebate programs, the incentive programs, the loyalty programs on top of all of these types of partners are pretty different. So how do I encourage these affiliates, affinity, ambassadors, advocates, super connectors, influencers? It's the Kim Kardashian rule. Before you hire Kim for $1 million Instagram ad, you kind of think back, I got to have some way of measuring this to hopefully we sell more than $1 million to make this worth it. And so all of this type of technology is building to actually properly pay rebates before the point of sale. And all those 28 moments, they act as one of these business models. We're very familiar with the land part of it, depending on the industry, but the expansion now, these partners. So in a B2B environment, business to business, the average customer now has 7 partners across their journey. It's not just that partner that might have collected the money in that indirect sale. There's 6 other partners that didn't get involved in the point of sale, but are adding value before the point of sale, after the point of sale, even at the point of sale. You watch the growth of marketplaces, 24% of marketplace transactions today, there is somebody else pressing the buy button. It's a partner that's creating the solution and buying it, procuring it, provisioning it on behalf of the customer. So this whole idea, even at land, you've got these partner assist models that are growing rapidly. On top of all of this, you've got the technology alliances, the strategic alliances, the business alliances. When that Ford truck becomes now a computer on wheels, and you look at Tesla, their major competitor in this space, is a computer company. And they might be competing against Apple, they might be competing against other computer companies in the future. Their view of alliances is much different than the automobile industry has been for over 100 years. So rebates, which has been somewhat linear in a certain swim lane, now has 6 swim lanes, which is different and more interesting across all of these different parts of the equation. There's another piece that's going on, and this was Accenture research. They went and asked every CEO of every company, in every geography, of every size, in every industry. The result was 76% of CEOs today in this room and your clients think that their current business model will be unrecognizable in 5 years. The number one reason was ecosystems, partnerships. Every industry is changing so quickly that these are your best-selling business books now. Subscription and consumption models. Looking at direct-to-consumer from a B2B perspective. Looking at usage-based and value-based pricing as a model. Looking at product-led growth. If you're one of the 175,000 software companies today, your board, your venture capital or your private equity board, is pushing you into PLG. Look at Zoom through the pandemic. Look at Slack. Salesforce paid $27.7 billion for a PLG company. Very little revenue, very little profit, didn't matter. This product-led growth replaces your sales department, it replaces your marketing department, it replaces your channel and your distribution, it replaces everything. It's this wonderful, shiny object that entire industries are looking at now, and the growth of marketplaces. So just in the tech industry, I mentioned Dell earlier, Dell committed 100% of the company to subscription and consumption. A $104 billion company selling every 30 days forever. You're going to see a theme here. Cisco did the same thing. $50 billion company. Already a third software committed the entire thing to 100% subscription consumption. Lenovo, a company I used to work for, did the same thing. IBM did the same thing. IBM services company became Kyndryl. They've laid off all of the traditional business, and now they're going 100% all-in subscription consumption. And HPE is the last one I'll mention. They're actually further ahead than anyone, and they're growing their subscription business by triple digits, faster than Microsoft and AWS and Google are selling the cloud right now. Lower numbers, but starting to see success. I just showed you about 80% of the client-server era before cloud, and I just showed you about $1 trillion in revenue moving subscription. This is happening across industry. I mentioned Ford earlier, the same thing. So what's happening from a people perspective? Rebates are still a people business that work with technology to make it happen. And in every company, in every industry, the vast majority run their rebates, run it in a silo. There's always that channel organization. There's always that distribution organization that sits out somewhere on the org chart. Nobody knows what they do. And they're always the kind of the redheaded stepchildren of the organization. They have their own department. The head of that department is, has a head of sales, has a head of marketing, has a head of operations and finance, and all these things self-contained over here. The Harvard Business Review actually wrote a big article to say the leader of this group looks more like a CEO or a general manager than a head of sales or something. If you try to take your head of sales and make them the head of channels, they fail more times than not. It's not a see a bear, shoot a bear type of business. It's more of a general management thing that runs on its own. But this is changing. So Microsoft, the big number we saw, 96%. The one number Andrew didn't share is on top of the 470,000 partners they have, 400 new partners join Microsoft every single day. They're creating what I ran IBM's channel. They're creating an IBM-sized channel every 3 months. It's a ridiculous thing to think about from a rebates perspective or just onboarding this many partners. But they created a new ecosystem chief that owns all of those 6 swim lanes and has 6 vice presidents running this all together. And then they came out with their new commerce experience earlier this year. They changed their entire rebate system into a point system. They dropped about 5 bombs on their channel to start this year. And last week he quit. He was supposed to talk here in Miami at Ingram. The day before, he just tendered his resignation. It was a little bit too much, too fast in front of the channel. They started looking like Ford with the dealers kind of pushing back a little bit. AWS put in an ecosystem chief. Google put in an ecosystem chief. IBM put in an ecosystem chief. So what's interesting about all these people? None of them come from a channel background. Some of them come from McKinsey and Boston Consulting and other places. None of them have ever been on a channel chief list. None of them have ever created a rebate program. They're coming from somewhere else. In some cases, like IBM, the global channel chief now reports to Kate. In other cases, like Google and Microsoft, the channel chief was shown the door. This is how fast these changes are coming. So let's talk about these silos for a minute. One of the most interesting things about ecosystems goes back to this idea of having a self-contained organization that dreams up rebates. So when the world turns into 6 swim lanes, the organization starts to change. And what happens is there's 8 different departments that these people are embedded in. So if you're in those first 28 moments of that customer journey, and you've got these ecosystem leaders that are fixated, obsessed over these 28 moments, you embed them into the marketing department. Your direct marketing team's trying to earn 1, 2, 3, 4 of those 28 moments. The other 24 are going to be owned in that room as well. And so your overall strategy is going to be contained. Same with the sales department, same with the customer success department. Every 30 days forever, you're going to have ecosystem partnership people embedded there, making rebate programs inside the customer success organization. This is similar to what we saw about 10 years ago with data science. The data science, the CTO, the CDO didn't create an organization siloed off from the company. They sent all the data scientists into marketing, sales, operations, finance, HR. They embedded them across the organization, and then they dotted line back to this CTO. It makes the most sense, and that's where ecosystems are going, and that's why they're different than traditional channels. Couple minutes left. This embedded model, and I'm going to go back to IBM. I worked at IBM for 17 years. But what most people don't know about IBM is for 29 straight years, including last year, they've won the patent race. By this measure, they're the most innovative, inventive company in the world. And I don't think any of us in this room would think of IBM as that. The reason we don't is for 10 straight years, almost every single quarter they've dropped revenue. When I joined the company in 1994, they're at 58 billion. They went to 108 when I left. As of last quarter, they're down to 58 again. They've dropped in half over the last decade. So how could the most inventive company, inventing Internet of Things, AI, automation, blockchain, quantum computing, AR, VR, MR, the metaverse, self-driving cars, drones, whatever future technology you want to talk about, they own the IP in many of these cases, and they haven't monetized a penny of it. The conclusion on the most recent CEO after the latest one was fired was it takes an ecosystem. None of what we invented is actually a product. So I'll just tell you a quick story. Watson, 10 years ago, was created and productized. In the 90s, Watson beat Garry Kasparov at chess. most of us watched is Watson beat Jeopardy. Well, guess what? Let's productize it. It cures cancer, it predicts nuclear explosions, and it predicts the weather. We bought the Weather Channel, sent it out to distribution as a SKU. Well, all the hospitals that bought Watson ended up pushing it back out. New York Times did a big expose. It actually probably did more harm over the last decade at curing cancer than what the doctors could have done on their own, because it was oversold and not represented properly. And then they actually farmed out Watson. Watson Health is for sale as well. They're getting rid of that piece. So it takes an ecosystem. None of these products in AI and automation and IoT, they're not SKUs themselves. They're part of a 7-layer solution. And companies are starting to do that. The last thing I'm going to talk about is marketplaces. During the pandemic, marketplaces grew more in 3 months than the last 10 years combined. The US economy became 1/3 marketplace. So they grew fast. So now we're not exactly post-pandemic yet, but we're kind of seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. But we're starting to watch now. Was this a plateau that's going to settle down and the pendulum will come back? And these are consumer categories. You can probably barely read them. But the fact is it's not. The bump that we got through the pandemic is continuing. Marketplaces are playing more and more of a role. Think of embedded technology, think of subscription models. You don't buy Netflix from your cable guy in the white van. You buy Netflix on a digital subscription. So all of these trends are coming around marketplaces with some staying power. In the technology industry in the middle, we know who the hyper marketplaces are, and that's where you buy paper and toner and things like that. But in the middle, we suspect there's going to be about 20 super marketplaces in tech that cover about 80% of the opportunity. By the end of the decade, this is going to be measured in trillions of dollars. Wall Street's starting to pay attention to this. There's not a lot of good ways, well, I guess now there is ways to make money in the middle, but the money is to be made on the other 20%. There's 35 million potential marketplaces you could build. So companies like Miracle in Europe raised $555 million a couple months ago. Locally, AppDirect raised 185. Little company up in Saskatoon, Canada raised 119. The 150 marketplace development firms are now being chosen the 5 winners who are going to take us forward. And if you make one of these marketplaces serving mid-sized clinics in upstate New York, a very narrow focused marketplace, the companies that you're going to use to build that are starting to be chosen by Wall Street. The debate about taxation is another thing. What are the economics of marketplaces? Well, if you look last year, Apple was trying to get the New York Times to pay $45 to be in the marketplace. That failed. They're in court with Epic trying to charge them $30. Well, last summer, Microsoft took 20% taxation down to 3%. Google followed within 30 days. AWS is kind of at 5%, but you can get to 3%. The SaaS companies, the App Exchange, Salesforce, HubSpot, ServiceNow, Workday, Marketo, they're still at 15%. But we're going through this change right now that we think all consumer and everything is probably going to come down to a credit card swipe. The actual cost, gross to net cost of a marketplace, which opens up a ton of rebates. And the billions of dollars these companies are building into marketplaces are to play the orchestration role and start to pay out increased rebates at every point of that customer journey. So back, the future of distribution. I think it's very strong. There's a lot of moving parts here. There's a lot of orchestration that needs to be done. There's a lot of chaos that needs to be organized in front of the customer. Coming out of hiding and creating the technology, the platform for distribution, working with Enable, working with others to build this at scale is exactly what the opportunity is for the next decade, and looks a little bit less of what it has been for decades past. So thank you very much. I'm around for the rest of the day if you have any questions. Appreciate it.